So something that's really useful to experiment with, especially whenever you're developing your first application, is something called the app delegate, which can be found over here. And every application that we make for iOS by default comes with this app delegate.swift file. Whenever I click that file and I open it up in the editor, I can just use the full editor in this. I don't need to use the assistant editor. Basically, the app delegate is kind of like what happens whenever your app as a whole does something. So the app delegate is always running, and it basically allows us to access things like what happens whenever someone hits the home button while they're in our app, what happens whenever they get a phone call while they're in our app, what happens whenever something else happens, or they want to open up a new app, or blah 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 blah. The point is that the app delegate is like a higher level than the viewcontroller.swift file or another viewcontroller.swift, whatever your custom class file that you've created. The app delegate is necessary for the application to actually behave properly. And luckily, in Swift, we actually have this pretty well commented. So it's a series of functions right here. And these functions run at different times in your application's life cycle. So by default, we just have stuff that happens after the application gets launched. We could put that code here. We have application will resign active. You can see sent when application is about to move from active to inactive. This can occur for certain types of temporary interruptions, such as an incoming phone call or text message, or when the user quits the application, it begins to transition to the background state. Use this method to pause ongoing tasks, disable timers, and validate graphics. Games should use this method to pause. So this is, if I hit return, I could add in a bunch of code here. For example, have it pause our game, or change something, or say like, do you still want to continue? Application did enter background happens once it is hit to the background. So this happens, followed by this, so will and did. So will resign, and then did resign, basically did enter background. Will enter foreground, so this is, we've pulled the application back up. It was already running, but we've pulled it back up. Will enter foreground, so this occurs before this. And then did become active, was it opened, basically. And will terminate, which is when it's actually going to be closed. That's usually used to save data. So the app delegate is something that you should use pretty often, but use cautiously. This is how we might send notifications, how we might handle, like I said, pausing or things like that. If we have certain functions that need to run right whenever we start that can't be tied to the viewcontroller.swift, we could do that here. This is, it's a really important part of your application, but I don't want you to become reliant on it. There should be very little code that goes in here until you're working on a larger scale application with things like pause functions.